Hey, sweet friends, this is Christy coming back to you live. Once again, I think it is so funny how Satan tries to do things that make our video not be able to play. And I just think it's Satan fighting against us because he doesn't want you to hear what I have to say. So we're going to pray over this video that Satan is in no way going to hinder what I want to talk to you about today in order to give you some hope. So, what we're talking about, or what I was talking about earlier, was I had a lady email me a question about suicide. Again, this seems to be just such a prominent problem everywhere and every day. So she said that she had found her husband, which thank God I never had to deal with that, who had killed himself. And that she was living with a lot of labels that people put on her. And I was so glad to hear from her because I can tell you firsthand of what being labeled is like. I have never gone live or really spoke about my husband's death 5 years ago and him committing suicide in the federal courthouse. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that and how when bad things happen to good people, not to make that label stick where it affects your life every day. So, I know most of you know, or really close friends of mine, should I say, know what happened with my husband back then. And I just thought it was time when this lady emailed me this question to let you guys know, friends, co-workers of his, family, what actually took place the night before, let me say, he committed suicide. I want to just first say this video is in no way laying blame on anything or anyone that had anything to do with that. I want you to know that up front. The only real reason that I'm coming forward with this video now is to help people like myself who struggled with being labeled for the last 5 years. And by God's grace was set free. I know now that my identity is not in the labels that people try to put on me through that hard time. My identity is in Jesus Christ, and yours is too. So for those of you who don't know, prior to the day of David committing suicide, a lot of people do not know that this took place the night before. I came home from work and found David in a very, very bad state of mind due to prescription drugs. He was so out of it that I was afraid that maybe he had overdosed or something. I had never seen him like that. So as the evening went on and it got worse and worse and worse, I decided to call 911 because I felt as if he really needed help. He was already threatening that he was going to leave and try to commit suicide. Let me just say, before I go into any explanation of that most of you saw a different side of him at work, church, away. That was really what was going on at home. For those of you who didn't know, David had a lot of problems prior to me ever entering his life that I had no idea about until after his death. I don't know many of you know, the night before we got married, that he went out in the driveway in his underwear and his daughter in the car choked her. I didn't know that till after he had passed away, and the neighbor told me that it was true, that that really did happen. I can understand now, knowing a lot of things that I know now, probably why some of his family wasn't speaking to him after we got married. I can't even imagine what his 3 children went through just throughout their life, with having a mother that struggled with prescription drugs and also a father. I think it's great to see how well these girls turned out, that they went through school, they're having a good life now, and they too were a victim of their circumstance. I'm hoping that in no way that those children or anybody in his family feels any type of guilt for what he did, because it was him that made the choice to commit suicide and to take his own life. I wish I could say that in the 4 months we were married that I was that powerful of a woman that would cause somebody to want to commit suicide. And that's the first label that I was labeled with. Oh, it must be his new life. It must be this new marriage. You know, as I told you prior, David was already diagnosed with being bipolar prior to me marrying him. Certainly after we got married and I moved in, I started seeing very extreme sides of that. And we too went to the doctor, and sure enough, he was diagnosed as being bipolar. I had no idea that he had that diagnosis prior to us getting married until after his death, and going through his papers and finding some medical papers that said he was diagnosed with that years ago. So let's get back to the night prior to his suicide. I called 911 for very much concern for him. Like I said, he was threatening suicide that night. The police did come. I told them what was going on, but at that point, David had left the house. He had been gone almost 2 hours. I contacted his parents while the police were there, and the police stayed with me and waited on him to come back. And they had an APB out on his car looking for him because he was driving under the influence of prescription drugs. And all of us feared that somebody else's life may be in danger from him being on the road. So about 2 hours after he left, he came back to the house. He was full of grease from head to toe, had no idea where he had been, and he was so out of it, he didn't even realize where he was, what he was doing, and it was really scary. The police called me in the bedroom and asked me if I knew what prescription drugs he was on. I didn't. I didn't really pay as close attention as I should have to all the medicine that he was combining and taking. After he came back and the police asked me that, we went back into the living room. And once David pulled out his card that he worked for the federal government and had been with them for 29 years, and that he had been drug screened, and all that kind of stuff, the officer never thought another minute about it. Me begging him to take him because he needed help, that he had threatened suicide. David told the officer that he was just mad, and he just said that, and the officer left. Once again, I called my pastor and 2 of my very best friends to come over and stay with me and help me with him in knowing what to do. My pastor and his wife arrived, my 2 best friends arrived, and we stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get him to go to the hospital to get some help. He was so out of it. I had no idea where he had been, what he had taken, why did he have grease all over him. And so after not being successful of talking him into going to the hospital, 2 o'clock in the morning, the pastor decided to leave. My friends left. And we went to bed about 2 in the morning. I got up the next morning, just as I would for work, and David happened to still be there, which was very unusual because he left for work at 4:30 in the morning, working at the courthouse. So I thought that was kind of odd. And then I was putting my makeup on in the bedroom, and David was standing against the door frame looking at me. I had never seen a look like that before that I can't even explain it. So all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit told me, and I heard it so audibly, Christy, tell him you love him and that everything is going to be okay. So I did. He then came over, kissed me on the forehead, and left for work. I never knew that would be the last time that I saw him. I kind of think in the moment of him standing in that doorway that he was considering whether he was going to take me with him and then take himself. And by the grace of God and me talking to him and not acting mad, that didn't happen. The next morning I'm getting ready for work, and all of a sudden received a phone call that my husband had been in an accident. I had no idea what had happened because by the grace of God, our cable was out that morning, so I wasn't watching TV while I was getting ready for work. Had no idea what had taken place. They told me he was in surgery. I just assumed everything was going to be okay. I went to the hospital and faced all type of news crews, questions that I had no answers for. I had no idea what had happened. I go into the hospital and they take me to a small room, and I sit in there until the doctor comes in. He came in with my husband's wedding ring in his hand, and he said to me, Christy, we've done all that we could do. Your husband has passed away. That was the most hardest time in my life. And I think that's where most of the labels that I was getting labeled for started. I started hearing, Christy, you're a gold digger. Christy, you're the black widow. And all kind of things that were very hurtful to me. That they never ever knew the truth of what David was doing when he was away from work. I feel it was very unfair and very unjust of how we were treated by the employees and the staff at the federal government after this happened. Moving on, and 5 years later, how this has impacted me. Over the last 5 years, I've been attending Celebrate Recovery, and I've been learning how to get those labels off of me and not to let that stuff stick, but to learn that my identity is in Jesus Christ and not my husband's suicide. I hope that his children and his family hasn't let any of those labels stick either, because once again, I'll tell you once again, this was in no way, by no means, anyone's fault other than his. It was his free will and it was his choice. But the ones of us who had to stay behind to pick it up, the aftermath of it, it's been very difficult. I just so happened to know Ronnie Bruce from being on Call to Prayer. He was had the Ronnie Bruce Show on WDJC for almost 28 years. We met, and that was probably the best thing that God could have ever done for me. We ended up getting married, been married now 3 years, and happily married. And I just can't believe what a rock he has been to help me get through dealing with these issues of my husband's suicide and not becoming that person that people label me as. I'll go ahead and be honest with you. My husband worked for an office supply company after he left WDJC. He went to the federal courthouse where one of his accounts were. They heard that he was dating me, and said, do not marry her. She is a gold digger, and she is known here at the courthouse as a black widow. What a shame. I feel sorry for those people who came up with those labels for me. It is so far from the truth. First of all, if you really would have known David's financial situation, there's no way I was in it for the money. I think most of you know that, we were struggling financially. I could have, if I was a gold digger, picked somebody from a very wealthy home, a very wealthy business, and I chose not to do that because this marriage was not about money to me. So for those of you, just FYI, I wanted to put an end to that label. It's very hurtful, and I have to say in those 5 years, and I have to be truthful with you guys, the thought of suicide crept through my mind time and time and time again. And I still battle that. With the help of my husband and Celebrate Recovery, I've been able to work on knocking those labels off. I'm not a black widow. I'm not a gold digger. I'm not any of those things that people call me, and this is why. I want you to hear me real well, sweet friends who deal that you feel like you've got a label, whether it's divorce, whether it's you've been married several times, just whatever it may be that you feel labeled by. Nerd, not good enough, not sufficient enough, just whatever it is that people are calling you or labeling you. In Galatians 2:20, and this is what has helped me get through this situation, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. When Paul said he had been crucified with Christ, he meant that his old, sinful, enslaved wickedness, loving self had been killed. It was crucified the day that Christ died, and therefore all our labels were crucified the day that Christ died. And isn't that a fantastic feeling to know? For Paul, there was only one label that mattered, and that was the label, Christ lives in me. That's my label now. That reality will help you to define who you are and whose you are. The same is true for us. Our old self was crucified with Christ, and we are not ultimately defined by our struggles. We are defined by our union with Jesus Christ, our old self, and all its labels are dead and buried. There'll be times when we feel like we'll never change, like we'll always be angry, have an eating disorder, lust, worry, greedy, or whatever it is. But God's reality must always trump our perceived reality. Will not always be the same. Why? Because Christ lives in us. And when Christ lives in us, the old labels no longer apply. Every day we must live in the light of who we truly are. When we are tempted to be angry, we must remember anger belongs to the old me. When we are tempted to lust, we must remember that lust belongs to the old self. When we are tempted to worry, we must remember that our old worrying self was crucified with Christ. We, sweet friends, are not our labels. We are Christ. Once again, I so appreciate you joining us today, and we want to hear from you. Thank you for letting me share. I know this video was a little longer than our usual, but it's really important for people that know and have been through what it's like being labeled, what it can do to you, that this message gets out to those of you who label people and those who have been labeled. I'm so excited to be coming to you tomorrow live during my lunch hour, and I hope that this video has helped a lot of people. Share it with your friends. Once again, we want to hear from you. This is your blog and your voice. So send us questions that you'd like us to talk about at hopeknowsyourname@gmail.com. Follow our blog at hopeforeveryday.com. You guys, we want to hear from you. We love you. And once again, be blessed. Thanks for letting me share, sweet friends. We'll see you tomorrow.